A billionaire philanthropist, admired for his generosity, lives with a void that luxury cannot fill, the mystery of his biological roots. When an old letter reveals a past filled with conspiracies, betrayals, and a lost family, he embarks on a dangerous journey to uncover the truth. Amid threats, unexpected allies, and a cousin willing to do anything to silence him, he faces choices that could tarnish his reputation, but also liberate his soul. Will the pursuit of truth lead him to destruction or redemption? Discover a story of courage, sacrifice, and the transformative power of love and truth. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow on the windows of the Mendez Montgomery mansion in the Upper East Side, a prestigious neighborhood in New York. Alexander Montgomery gazed at the city from his balcony, a glass of red wine in his right hand, and a distant look that didn't match the grandeur of the moment. At 45, he was considered one of the most successful and respected businessmen in the country, but something in his expression betrayed a restlessness that not even his financial empire could soothe. "Mr. Montgomery?" The voice of Margaret, his housekeeper of over 2 decades, interrupted his thoughts. "The foundation staff is waiting in the office for the meeting." Alexander glanced at his wristwatch, a gift from his adoptive mother Eleanor on his 30th birthday, and nodded. "Thank you, Margaret. I'll be right down." The office, located on the first floor of the mansion, was a space that blended elegance and practicality. On the walls, alongside diplomas and certifications, were photos of hospital openings, schools, and cultural centers funded by the Montgomery Foundation. In each image, Alexander appeared smiling, but only Margaret, who had known him since he was a boy, noticed that the smile never quite reached his eyes. "Good afternoon, everyone," Alexander greeted the small team waiting for him. Olivia Sanders, the Foundation's executive director, immediately began the presentation on the new social projects. "The Family Support Center in the Bronx is nearly complete," Olivia explained as she flipped through the slides. "It will be our largest facility yet, capable of serving over 500 families a month." Alexander observed every detail of the project attentively, making occasional notes. His commitment to social causes went beyond mere philanthropy. It was a way to honor the memory of Eleanor, who had always taught him the importance of giving back to society. "Excellent work, Olivia," he commented at the end of the presentation. "I want to personally attend the opening. These families deserve to know they're not alone." After the meeting, as evening approached, Alexander went up to the room that had belonged to his adoptive mother. Since his departure 3 years ago, he had kept the room practically intact, like a sanctuary to the memories they had shared. Eleanor Montgomery had been much more than an adoptive mother. She had been his safe harbor, his moral compass, the person who taught him that a man's true worth lies not in his wealth, but in his actions. Margaret found him there, contemplating an old photograph where Eleanor embraced him at his college graduation in business administration. "Dinner is served, sir," she announced softly, well acquainted with her employer's nostalgic ritual. "You know, Margaret," Alexander began, still gazing at the photo, "sometimes I wonder if I'm truly living up to her legacy. Eleanor built all of this from scratch, with solid principles and a clear vision for the future. You've turned her work into something even greater," Margaret gently interrupted. "Mrs. Eleanor was so proud of you. She always said you were the greatest blessing she could have received." Alexander smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes that Margaret knew well. It was the same look he had as a child, on the rare occasions when he mentioned his origins, his unknown roots. Eleanor had always been honest about the adoption, but the specific circumstances remained a mystery, one she had taken with her. "I'll have dinner in the office tonight, Margaret," he decided, placing the photograph back in its spot. "I need to review some contracts for the foundation." As he descended the stairs, Alexander couldn't help but glance at the hallway leading to the attic. It had been years since he had gone up there, since Eleanor had passed. Perhaps it was time to organize that space, to face the memories stored among dusty boxes and covered furniture. But not today. Today, like so many other days, he would settle for the comfort of his structured routine, with the familiar weight of responsibilities that, though significant, didn't quite fill the void he had always carried. In the solitude of his office, Alexander opened his laptop and began to work as night fell over New York. Outside, the city lights shimmered like earthly stars, each holding its own stories, its own secrets, and somewhere, among those millions of lights, were the answers he didn't yet know he was searching for. The weekend arrived with a persistent rain that kept Alexander indoors. After cancelling his morning appointments, he found himself restless, wandering the halls of the mansion as if searching for something he couldn't name. His steps inevitably led him to the attic stairs, and this time, unlike so many others, he didn't resist the urge to climb. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and stored memories. The light streaming through the small windows created dancing shadows among the covered furniture and the neatly organized stacks of boxes. Eleanor had always been methodical, even with the things she stored. "Do you need help, sir?" Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, startling Alexander, who was absorbed in his observations. "No, Margaret, I think I need to do this alone." The housekeeper nodded understandingly and descended, leaving Alexander with his memories and discoveries. He began to explore methodically, finding family albums, old company documents, and objects that told the story of the Montgomerys through the decades. It was when he moved a heavy carved wooden chest that something caught his attention. A small blue velvet box, apparently fallen behind the chest, was covered in a thin layer of dust. Alexander picked it up carefully, noticing that the velvet was worn at the edges. Inside the box, he found a yellowed letter folded with precision. His heart raced as he recognized Eleanor's elegant handwriting on the envelope, but upon opening the letter, he realized the handwriting on the paper was different, more urgent, more anguished. "Dear Eleanor, I cannot express my gratitude for what you are doing for us. I know it is a heavy burden I place on your shoulders, but you are the only one I can trust to keep Alexander safe. He is so small, so innocent, and what happened to our family? I cannot allow him to be caught in this storm. The Almeida Limas have always been a respected family, but now our name is tainted by betrayals and conspiracies that threaten to destroy everything. I cannot reveal all the details now. The less you know, the safer you will be. But know that your nephew is deeply involved in this situation, and I fear he will never forgive Alexander for being the true heir. Please, take care of my son as if he were your own. Give him all the love I cannot. Teach him to be a man of integrity, unlike those who destroyed our family. One day, perhaps, when it is safe, the truth may come to light." With eternal love and gratitude, Evelyn Alexander had to sit down in an old upholstered armchair as he processed the words. Evelyn, his biological mother. Almeida Lima, a name that carried historical weight in New York society, a family that had virtually disappeared from high society 4 decades ago, around the time he was adopted. His hands trembled slightly as he reread the letter. Eleanor had never mentioned this connection to the Almeida Limas, never spoken of an Evelyn or a nephew involved in conspiracies. Why had she guarded this secret so closely? A distant thunderclap made him glance out the attic window. The rain continued to fall as if the sky itself shared the turmoil within him. Fragments of memories began to rearrange themselves in his mind. Eleanor's worried looks when he asked about his biological family, her insistence on keeping him away from certain social circles, the way she always seemed tense when the Almeida Lima name was mentioned at events. Alexander tucked the letter into his coat pocket and descended the attic stairs with heavy steps. In his office, he turned on his computer and began researching the Almeida Limas. The information was scarce, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase the most incriminating records. But one name stood out: Richard Almeida Lima, the current president of one of the country's largest private banks, the son of Evelyn's cousin. A photo of Richard at a recent charity event showed a middle-aged man with a stern expression and cold eyes. Alexander recognized that face. They had crossed paths at various social events over the years, always maintaining a cordial distance. Now he understood the calculating looks Richard had directed at him, the veiled discomfort in their formal greetings. "Margaret?" he called, pressing the intercom on his desk. "Yes, sir?" Please get in touch with Olivia. I need her to compile a complete list of all charity events scheduled for the next few weeks, especially those involving the banking sector. Any new project in mind, sir?" Alexander looked again at Richard's photo on the computer screen. "Let's just say it's time to get closer to some old family acquaintances." Outside, the rain finally began to let up, but inside the Montgomery mansion, a storm was just beginning to brew. The Artisan Cafe in the historic center of New York maintained its 1950s elegance almost intact. Alexander chose a discreet table at the back of the establishment, observing the movement through the reflection of the Art Deco mirrors that adorned the walls. He had scheduled this meeting after receiving a series of intriguing emails from Laura Carter, an investigative journalist for The Guardian, known for her stories about the city's traditional families. Mr. Montgomery, a woman around 35 years old with brown hair tied in a casual bun and sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses, approached the table. "I'm Laura Carter. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Alexander gestured to the chair across from him. "I must admit, I was intrigued by your approach, Ms. Carter. It's not every day a journalist of your caliber takes an interest in stories about corporate philanthropy." Laura smiled faintly as she settled into her seat. "And it's not every day a billionaire so readily agrees to meet with an investigative journalist." She paused deliberately, especially after they start asking questions about the Almeida Limas. The coffee Alexander was bringing to his lips stopped mid-air. "How did you—" "I received an anonymous tip about your recent research," Laura explained, leaning slightly over the table. "But that's not what brought me here. Mr. Montgomery, what do you know about the Romano case?" "Romano case?" Alexander frowned. "I'm afraid I'm not familiar." Laura opened her folder and slid an old photo across the table. It showed a middle-aged man in a typical 80s suit, standing next to an elegant woman Alexander recognized immediately. It was Evelyn, his biological mother, much younger than in the only photo he had found in the attic. "This was my father, Anthony Romano," Laura said, her voice betraying restrained emotion. "He was a civil police investigator. 35 years ago, he was leading an investigation involving the Almeida Lima family. Weeks later, he mysteriously disappeared during the investigation." Fernando felt a lump form in his throat. "And you think there's a connection to what happened to my biological family?" "I'm certain," Laura stated, her eyes gleaming with determination. "I've spent the last 5 years quietly investigating. Your biological father, Charles Almeida Lima, was the family patriarch at the time. He was about to make a significant accusation, something that would change the financial landscape of the country. But before he could do so, a scandal broke that destroyed the family's reputation." Fernando pulled Evelyn's letter from his pocket and showed it to Laura. The journalist read the contents with professional focus, making mental notes. "This confirms some of my suspicions," she murmured. "Mr. Montgomery, Richard Almeida Lima isn't just your distant cousin. He's the son of the man who orchestrated your family's downfall, and now he's about to become one of the most powerful men in the country." "Why are you telling me all this?" Fernando asked, studying the journalist's face. Laura carefully put away the photo of his father with near reverential care. "Because I believe that together we can uncover the truth. You have the name and the resources. I have the information and the connections. Most importantly, we both have personal reasons to want justice." A waitress approached to collect the empty cups, causing both of them to fall silent momentarily. When she walked away, Fernando broke the silence. "Richard is organizing a charity event next month. The financial elite of New York will be there." "The art auction at the Museum of Modern Art in New York?" Laura asked, her eyes sparkling with interest. "I've already secured a press pass, and I'm one of the main donors," Alexander added. "But before that, we need to investigate a rural property. The letter mentions that the most important documents were stored at the family's old ranch." Laura nodded, already pulling her iOS notebook from her bag. "The Santa Clara Ranch in Santa Fe. It's been abandoned for decades, but technically it still belongs to the Almeida Lima estate. I have a contact at the local records office who can help us access the original blueprints." Alexander watched the journalist work, impressed by her efficiency and knowledge of the case. There was something in her determination that went beyond professionalism. It was personal, visceral, like his own search for answers. Miss Carter. Laura, she corrected, without looking away from the screen. Laura, he continued. What happened to our families? It wasn't a coincidence, was it? She finally looked at him, her eyes carrying the weight of years of investigation and loss. No, Mr. Montgomery. It was part of something much bigger, and the people responsible are still out there, living their lives as if nothing happened. Alexander, he said. Call me Alexander. A silent understanding passed between them. There, in that historic cafe that had witnessed so many important meetings over the decades, a new alliance was being formed, a partnership based not only on the search for answers, but on the shared need to bring justice to the past. The dirt road leading to the Santa Clara Ranch wound through green hills on the outskirts of Santa Fe. The afternoon sun was already beginning to set when Alexander's car, driven by a discreet and trusted driver, stopped in front of the massive, wrought-iron gates. Laura, who had come in her own vehicle, parked right behind. Impressive, murmured Alexander, observing the old ranch headquarters rising in the distance. Even abandoned, the structure maintained an aristocratic dignity, with its imposing columns and tall windows, now partially covered by creeping vines. According to the records I found, Laura explained, consulting her notes, the ranch was the last property that remained with your biological family after the scandal. But no one ever managed to sell it. It seems there's a special clause in the deed that prevents the sale. They crossed the abandoned garden, where ancient statues emerged from the tall weeds like silent sentinels of the past. The creak of the main door echoed through the empty hall, stirring a cloud of dust that danced in the last rays of sunlight, filtering through the dirty windows. My contact at the records office mentioned something about an office on the upper floor, Laura continued, lighting the way with a flashlight. Apparently your biological father spent a lot of time there in the last few months before the scandal. Alexander followed Laura up the main staircase, each step protesting under their weight. The smell of mold and abandonment was strong, but there was something else in the air, a sense of untold history, of secrets preserved by time. The office was at the end of a long hallway. The door was locked, but Laura had come prepared. With surprising skill, she manipulated the old lock until she heard a satisfying click. "Where did you learn that?" Alexander asked, impressed. "You'd be surprised at what an investigative journalist needs to know," she replied with a half-smile. "Besides, my father taught me a few tricks before he disappeared." The office was a spacious room with bookshelves covering 2 entire walls. A heavy mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it, an imposing portrait showed an elegant couple, Alexander's biological parents. "That's them," Alexander whispered, stepping closer to the painting. "Evelyn and Charles Almeida." "Lima." Laura studied the portrait with professional attention. "Your father has a look of concern in his eyes, don't you think? This painting must have been done close to the time of the scandal." They began to methodically examine the office. Laura photographed important documents, while Alexander explored every drawer and compartment of the antique desk. It was when he noticed something strange on the floor beneath the portrait, a slightly loose floorboard. "Laura, help me with this." Together, they removed the floorboard, revealing a small compartment. Inside it, they found a worn leather folder and a diary with the initials CAL. "My God!" Laura exclaimed, carefully flipping through the diary. "This is Fernando. Your father was documenting everything. Every suspicious move, every irregular transaction. He was building a case against his own cousin, Albert Almeida Lima, Richard's father." Fernando examined the documents in the folder. They were bank records, incriminating letters, and photographs that exposed an elaborate embezzlement scheme. Albert was siphoning money from the family bank to offshore accounts, and when my father found out, he planned to ruin Charles's reputation before the truth came out, Laura finished, her voice trembling slightly. "And my father must have discovered something related to this during his investigation." A noise from the lower floor made both of them freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the abandoned mansion. "We're not alone," Laura whispered, quickly stashing the diary and documents in her bag. Fernando turned off the flashlight and pulled Laura behind one of the bookshelves. The footsteps grew closer to the hallway, accompanied by muffled male voices. "The car is outside," one of the voices said. "Someone's up here." "Search everything," another voice ordered. "The boss wants to know if they found anything." Laura and Fernando exchanged tense glances in the darkness. The journalist pointed to a side door in the office, likely a service exit. With silent movements, they slipped toward it as voices and footsteps grew closer. The door led to an external service staircase, partially covered by climbing vines. They descended as quietly as possible, the old metal occasionally creaking under their weight. "Up there!" a voice shouted from the office window. "Run!" Alexander grabbed Laura's hand, and they dashed through the overgrown garden, dodging statues and unruly bushes. The men emerged from the house, chasing them, but Alexander and Laura had already reached their cars. "Meet me at the Artisan Cafe," Laura shouted as she got into her car. "Tomorrow, same time!" The two vehicles sped off in different directions, kicking up dust on the dirt road. Through the rearview mirror, Alexander saw two men standing by the ranch gate, talking on their cell phones. "John," Alexander called to his driver, "make sure we're not being followed." As the car wound through the back roads of upstate New York, Alexander tried to organize his thoughts. The discoveries at the ranch were explosive, but the fact that men were guarding the place proved they weren't the only ones interested in the Almeida Lima family secrets. Richard obviously suspected someone might come looking for evidence. In her briefcase, Laura now carried the proof her father had been searching for over 3 decades. But would they be able to use this information without putting their own lives at risk? And more importantly, where did Evelyn fit into all of this? The answers were beginning to emerge, but each discovery seemed to bring with it new and more dangerous questions. The headline in the morning paper made Alexander choke on his coffee. "Montgomery Foundation under scrutiny. Misuse of funds in social projects." The article, written by a columnist known for his connections to the financial sector, hinted at irregularities in the foundation's management of resources. "This is outrageous," Olivia exclaimed, barging into Alexander's office without ceremony, a copy of the newspaper in hand. "All our accounts are audited regularly. Who would dare to publish something like this?" Alexander took a deep breath, staring at the photo accompanying the article. Himself at a charity event with a biased caption questioning his integrity. "This isn't a coincidence, Olivia. This is just the beginning." His phone buzzed with a message from Laura. "Did you see the paper? We need to talk. I have more information. Same place, 30 minutes. At the Artisan Cafe, Laura was already waiting for him at a back table, surrounded by papers and her laptop open. Her dark circles betrayed a sleepless night. "I spent the early hours analyzing the ranch documents," she began as soon as Alexander sat down. "Your father's journal is astonishing. He systematically documented how Albert and Richard built a network of influence using insider information from the bank. And now they're using that same network against me," Alexander added, showing her the newspaper headline. "Exactly. The columnist who wrote the piece, Marcus Alvarez, is known to be close to Richard. But there's more." Laura turned her laptop, revealing a series of emails. "My contacts in the journalism world warned me they're preparing more articles. They're going to question the source of your wealth, suggest connections to shady businesses." "But that's ridiculous. Everything I have came from my adoptive mother's work." "They know that. But they'll try to tarnish Eleanor's reputation too, suggesting she acquired her fortune through questionable means. It's a tactic to pressure you into backing down." Alexander felt his blood boil. Eleanor had always been a model of integrity. Allowing them to stain her memory was out of the question. "We need to react carefully," Laura warned. "Richard isn't alone in this. Look at this." She showed a photo taken at the ranch the day before, the men who had pursued them talking on the phone. "Do you recognize the car in the background? It's from the bank's security department. Richard is using the institution's resources for his personal vendetta." The waitress approached to take their orders, forcing them to quickly hide the incriminating documents. After she walked away, Alexander spoke in a low voice. "Margaret called me early this morning. She said a man came to the mansion claiming to be from the IRS. He wanted to verify the Foundation's documents. Fake agent, Laura stated confidently. It's another intimidation tactic. They want you to know they can cause trouble on all fronts. Alexander's phone rang. It was his press assistant. Mr. Montgomery, I'm sorry, but 3 partner companies have just cancelled their commitments with the Foundation. They cited concerns about negative media exposure. After hanging up, Alexander ran his hands over his face, trying to maintain his composure. They're trying to isolate the Foundation. If more partners pull out, several social projects will be affected. That's exactly what they want, Laura said, leaning over the table. They're attacking what you value most, your social work and Eleanor's memory. But we have an ace up our sleeve. She pulled the journal out of her bag. There's a passage here that mentions a safe in an old bank branch. Your father stored backup copies of all the documents there. Which branch? The first branch of the bank, in the historic downtown. It was deactivated years ago, but the building still belongs to the institution. And according to the diary, the vault is still there, protected by an old system that was never updated. Alexander checked his watch. The charity auction at the museum is in 2 weeks. Richard will be there, along with the press and the entire financial elite. Enough time to locate that vault, Laura agreed. But we need to be more careful. Richard has already shown he has eyes everywhere. As if to confirm her words, a man in a suit entered the cafe and sat at the counter, his eyes occasionally glancing toward their table. Don't look now, Laura murmured, but I think we've got company. Let's leave separately. Meet me tomorrow at the State Public Archives. We need to research the original blueprints of that bank. They discreetly said their goodbyes. As he walked to his car, Alexander noticed another man in a suit standing near the vehicle, pretending to talk on his phone. The message was clear. They were being watched. Back at the mansion, he found Margaret waiting for him with a worried expression. Sir, they called from the hospital in the Bronx. The bank that was funding the pediatric wing has cancelled its support. They said they need to reevaluate their partnerships. Alexander felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. It wasn't just his personal history at stake. Real lives depended on the Foundation's projects. But backing down now would mean allowing Richard and his allies to continue unchecked, perpetuating a cycle of injustice that had lasted decades. Margaret, please call an emergency meeting with the Foundation's board for early tomorrow morning. And, he hesitated for a moment, prepare the guest room. I have a feeling we'll need it soon. The old bank building was a prime example of 1920s architecture, with its Art Deco facade and bronze details now green with age. Fernando observed the structure from across the street, recalling the stories Eleanor used to tell about the golden era of downtown New York. The original blueprints show a vault area in the basement, Laura explained, approaching discreetly. She wore a formal blazer and carried an executive briefcase, blending in among the professionals moving through the historic district. I managed to schedule a visit with the building supervisor. He thinks I'm a historian researching banking architecture. The interior of the bank retained much of its original splendor: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and panels of fine wood on the walls. A gray-haired gentleman awaited them in the main lobby. Welcome, everyone. He introduced himself as Albert Mendez, the building supervisor for over 3 decades. It's a pleasure to host people interested in the history of this institution. As they walked through the building, Mr. Mendez shared stories about the time when the branch was fully operational. Fernando noticed that Laura paid special attention to every detail, every entrance and exit, memorizing the layout of the place. And this was the private vault area. The supervisor pointed to a heavy iron door in the basement. It's decommissioned now, of course. Most of the vaults were transferred to modern branches. Most? Laura asked casually. Well, Mr. Mendez hesitated. Some of the older vaults remain untouched. Bureaucratic issues, you know how it is. But we don't have access to that area. We'd need special authorization from the board. As they made their way back to the ground floor, Alexander noticed an old photograph on the wall. It showed the inauguration of the bank, and among the attendees was his biological grandfather, standing next to a young man he recognized as Albert Almeida Lima. Back on the street, Laura whispered, "The vault is still there." And from the supervisor's reaction when I mentioned the old vaults, he knows more than he's letting on. How do we access it? Alexander asked. I have an idea, but it's risky. The building offers guided tours for architecture students on Wednesdays. We can use that as cover for a more detailed exploration. That night, back at the mansion, Alexander found 3 more emails from partners cancelling projects with the foundation. The pressure was mounting, and Richard seemed determined to destroy everything he had built. Sir? Margaret entered the office with a worried expression. A young woman just delivered this in person. It was a plain brown envelope with no return address. Inside was just an old photograph. Evelyn, his biological mother, standing in front of a country house holding a baby. On the back, a handwritten message. Not all secrets should come to light. Think of your mother. Alexander felt a chill. It wasn't just a threat. It was confirmation that Evelyn was still alive and possibly in danger. Immediately, he called, Laura. I need to show you something, he said as soon as she answered. And I don't think we can wait until Wednesday. The vault might hold more than bank documents. It could have information about my mother's whereabouts. Alexander, Laura hesitated. I just got a notice from my editor. The paper is under pressure to pull me off investigative work. Richard is moving every possible piece. Then we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more people will be harmed. Alexander paused. Laura, if you want to back out, I understand. I've lost count of how many veiled threats I've received. This week. Not a chance, her voice was firm. My father didn't give up when he started investigating this story, and I won't give up either. But we need help. What kind of help? Mr. Mendez, the supervisor, I noticed how he looked at you. During the visit, I think he recognized your resemblance to Charles Almeida Lima. If we can convince him to help us, it's risky, Alexander pondered. If he's on Richard's side, it's a risk we need to take. Besides, from what I've researched, he worked at the bank throughout your father's tenure. He must know more about what really happened than he lets on. Alexander looked again at the photo of Evelyn with the baby. His biological mother had sacrificed everything to protect him, living in hiding for decades. Now it was his turn to fight for the truth. Early tomorrow, he decided, I'll talk to Mr. Mendez in person. If we're going to do this, it needs to be before Richard notices our interest in the old building. Be careful, Laura warned. I'll keep investigating your mother's whereabouts. This recent photo means someone knows where she is. After hanging up, Alexander remained in his office, gazing at the city lights through the window. Somewhere out there, his birth mother was waiting for the moment to emerge from the shadows. In the old vault, documents stored for decades could finally bring to light the truth that had cost so much to so many people. Margaret entered quietly with a cup of tea. You're looking more and more like her, she remarked softly. Like who? Mrs. Eleanor. When she was determined to do the right thing, no matter the cost, she had that exact look in her eyes. Alexander smiled faintly. Even amidst all the turmoil, Eleanor's legacy continued to guide his steps. And now, more than ever, he would need the strength and integrity she had taught him. Mr. Mendez was waiting for Alexander in a small cafe near the old bank, his aged hands trembling slightly as he held his coffee cup. It was early morning, and the place was practically empty. I knew this day would come, the old man began as soon as Alexander sat down. You're the spitting image of your father, you know. You have the same determined look in your eyes. So, you really knew him? Knew him? Young man, I was Carlos Almeida Lima's personal assistant. I was there the day he uncovered the irregularities, when he realized his own cousin was using the bank for illegal operations. Alexander leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. We need to access the vault in the basement. You're the only one who can help us. Mr. Mendez glanced around nervously before replying. Your father made me promise to keep the secret until you came looking for answers. But I can't just open the vault. There are protocols, cameras. There must be a way, Alexander insisted. The elderly supervisor sighed deeply. There is. The technical visits for maintenance of the old electrical system. They happen after hours, when only the night security guard is present. And, coincidentally, today is maintenance day. That night, Laura waited in her car 2 blocks from the bank, monitoring the activity. Alexander and Mr. Mendez, dressed in maintenance technician uniforms, entered through the service entrance. "The security guard has known me for years," Mr. Mendez explained as they descended to the basement. "He won't ask any questions." The vault area was bathed in a bluish gloom, illuminated only by emergency lights. The supervisor led them to the end of the hallway, stopping in front of a specific vault. "Number 0547, he murmured, turning the combination dial with experienced fingers. "Your mother Evelyn's birth date." The old mechanism protested momentarily before yielding with a metallic click. Inside, they found a leather folder similar to the one they had discovered at the ranch, but much thicker. "My God," Laura whispered, flipping through the documents quickly. "It's all here, records of illegal transfers, names of those involved, even—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes wide. "Alexander, look at this." It was a letter addressed to him, written by his biological father. The date was just a few days before the scandal broke. "My son, if you're reading this, it means the time has finally come for the truth to come out. What I've discovered goes beyond simple embezzlement. It's a scheme involving some of the most powerful families in the country, all connected through the bank. Albert and Richard aren't just ambitious, they're dangerous. When I confronted Albert about the irregularities, he threatened me, not me, but you and your mother. That's why we made the hardest decision of our lives, to entrust you to the care of Eleanor, my second cousin, the only person we could fully trust. Evelyn is safe, hidden where they can't find her. If you're reading this, look for Sunflower House in Aspen. There you'll find the missing answers. With love, your father, Charles." "Sunflower House," Alexander murmured, his voice choked. "Evelyn is alive, hidden there all this time." A noise in the hallway made them freeze. Footsteps were approaching, more than one person. "Quickly, Mr. Mendez whispered urgently. "There's an emergency exit behind that fire door. I'll distract them." Laura tucked the documents into her bag as Alexander hesitated. "Mr. Mendez." "Go," the old man insisted. "Make your parents' sacrifice worth it." And Alexander, your adoptive mother, Eleanor, she knew everything. She helped protect Evelyn all these years. Alexander and Laura had barely disappeared through the emergency exit when voices echoed down the vault hallway. "Mendez, what are you doing here at this hour?" It was the voice of Richard Almeida Lima. Outside, hidden in the shadows of an alley, Alexander and Laura heard more cars arriving. Men in suits stepped out, their serious faces illuminated by the streetlights. "We need to go to Aspen now," Laura whispered. "It won't take long for them to realize we accessed the vault." "What?" "About Mr. Mendez. He knew the risks. The best way to protect him is by finding his mother and exposing the whole truth." As they quickly moved away from the historic center, Alexander thought of Eleanor. His adoptive mother hadn't just protected him, she had kept a monumental secret for decades, ensuring Evelyn remained safe. More than ever, he needed to honor the legacy of both women who had sacrificed so much for him. "The charity auction is in 3 days, Laura reminded him, checking her phone as she drove. "Richard will certainly escalate his attacks when he realizes we're close to the truth." "Then we need to find Evelyn before that," Alexander replied, determined. "It's time to end these decades of lies and fear." The car sped along the Hudson River Parkway, heading toward the highway that would take them to Aspen. Somewhere in Tyson, that mountain town among sunflowers, awaited the final piece of the puzzle that would change their lives forever. The typical fog of Aspen enveloped the still empty streets as Alexander and Laura arrived in town. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in pink hues that contrasted with the green of the pine trees. "Sunflower House isn't listed in any official city records," Laura explained, consulting her notes on her laptop. "But I found references to a property on the outskirts that has always maintained a sunflower garden. The locals know it as Flower House." Following directions from a baker who was already opening his shop, they drove along a winding road that led away from the tourist center. After 20 minutes, they spotted a European-style house, partially hidden by a lush garden where dozens of sunflowers turned toward the rising sun. "This is it," Alexander murmured, his heart racing. After so long, He was just a few meters away from his biological mother. A woman in her 70s was pruning some plants near the gate. Seeing the car approach, she straightened up, adjusting her glasses to get a better look at the visitors. Her face visibly paled when Alexander stepped out of the vehicle. "Charles?" she whispered, taking a step back. "No," Alexander replied softly, moving closer. "I'm Alexander, your son." Evelyn brought her hands to her lips, tears welling up in her eyes. For a few moments she stood frozen, as if fearing this was an illusion that would vanish if she moved. "My boy," she finally managed to say, closing the distance between them with trembling steps. Her hands touched Alexander's face gently, as if he were made of glass. "You have your father's eyes." The moment was interrupted by the sound of other vehicles approaching. Laura, who had been keeping watch on the road, warned, "We've got company." 2 black cars. "Inside, quickly," Evelyn commanded, her voice taking on an urgent tone. She guided them through the garden to the house, locking the door as soon as they entered. "The back entrance leads to a trail in the woods. If we need to—" "No," Alexander interrupted firmly. "No more running. It's been decades, Mother. It's time to face this." Evelyn led them to a room decorated with antique furniture and walls covered in paintings. One of them caught Laura's attention. It showed Eleanor Montgomery in her youth, smiling as she held a bouquet of sunflowers. "Eleanor used to visit me regularly," Evelyn explained, noticing Laura's interest in the painting. "She was more than my cousin. She was my protector, my confidant. She kept me informed about you, Alexander, bringing photos, telling me about your achievements." Firm knocks on the door interrupted the conversation. Ricardo's voice sounded from outside. "We know you're in there. You'd better open up or we'll call the authorities." Evelyn walked over to an old desk, removing a loose floorboard beneath it. "Here," she said, pulling out a metal box. "These are the evidence your father couldn't deliver to the authorities. The real reason Richard and Albert destroyed our family." Inside the box were documents, microfilms, and an old flash drive. "It's not just records of embezzlement," Evelyn quickly explained. "It's proof of a much larger scheme. Albert and Richard weren't alone. There were judges, politicians, businessmen, an entire network of corruption that used the bank to launder money from illegal businesses." Margaret quickly examined the contents. "This explains why my father was—" She hesitated, swallowing hard. "He must have uncovered some connection during his investigation." The knocks on the door grew more intense. "Last chance!" Ricardo's voice sounded more threatening. "Why did you keep this evidence all these years?" Alexander asked his mother. "Because I knew Richard and Albert. I knew that one day they would try to regain full control of the bank to expand the scheme. The evidence was my insurance, and now it's yours." Evelyn held her son's hands. "Eleanor and I agreed to wait until you were ready, strong enough to face this battle." Margaret, who was monitoring the movement outside through a crack in the curtain, warned, "They're surrounding the house. They're going to try to come in through the back." Alexander made a quick decision. "Laura, take my mother through the back trail. Use the documents to ensure her safety. I'll face Richard." "No," Evelyn protested. "I won't let you face this alone." "I won't be alone," Alexander smiled, holding his mother's hands. "I have the love of 2 extraordinary mothers giving me strength. And besides," he pulled his phone from his pocket, showing a live stream being sent to a secure server. "Every word spoken here is being recorded. Laura will make sure it reaches the right people if anything happens." Evelyn hugged her son tightly. "You're as brave as your father." She turned to Laura. "Take care of the documents. And look for a woman named Helen Vieira in New York. She was your father's partner in the investigation. She has the other half of the evidence." As Laura guided Evelyn toward the back exit, Alexander took a deep breath and walked to the front door. When he opened it, he found Richard Almeida Lima and 2 burly men in suits. "It's over, Richard," Alexander said with a calm he didn't know he possessed. "In 3 days, at the charity auction, the whole truth will come out, unless you want to negotiate." Richard narrowed his eyes, studying the man who represented everything he had tried to destroy over the past decades. The final battle was about to begin, and this time there would be no escaping the consequences of the past. The 2 men stood, facing each other in the living room of Sunflower House. the tension of decades of secrets and resentment hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Richard dismissed his bodyguards with a wave, keeping only himself and Alexander in the room. "You're just like your father," Richard said, walking to the window and gazing at the garden. The same arrogance, the same obsession with playing the hero. "Did you learn nothing from what happened to him?" "I learned everything," Alexander replied, standing firm. "I learned about integrity, about courage, about doing the right thing even when it's hard." "What did you learn from your father, Richard? To destroy lives to maintain privileges?" Richard turned sharply, his eyes flashing. "Privileges? You talk about privileges while you grew up spoiled by Eleanor Montgomery, becoming society's darling. With your charity projects, I watched my father build this empire." "Build?" Alexander let out a bitter laugh. "You built an empire of lies, Richard. I've seen the documents. I know about the money laundering scheme, the politicians involved. How you used the bank to do what was necessary," Richard interrupted, his calm facade finally cracking. "You're as naive as Charles. The business world isn't your garden of flowers and good intentions. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty." "And how many lives were destroyed in the process? How many people like Laura Carter's father had to be silenced?" The mention of the Romano name made Richard's expression harden. "That nosy investigator dug his own grave, just like your biological father didn't know when to stop digging." Alexander felt his blood boil, but maintained his composure. Eleanor had always taught him that losing control meant losing the battle. "Is that why you're here, Richard? To make me stop digging?" "I'm here to offer a deal," Richard softened his tone, reverting to his refined banker persona. "The documents Evelyn kept, in exchange for your safety and the foundation. We could even establish a partnership between the bank and your social projects. Think of the people you could help with those resources. Resources stained with blood and suffering." Alexander shook his head. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about money or power. It's about justice." "Justice?" Richard laughed sarcastically. "And what do you plan to do, expose me at the charity auction? I've already thought of that. Why do you think I planted all those stories about your foundation? Your credibility is shaky. It'll be your word against mine, and guess who society will believe?" "Okay, it won't just be my word." Alexander grabbed his phone, showing the still active live stream. "Every confession of yours is being recorded. And that's not all. Laura is currently with Evelyn and the documents, meeting Helen Vieira, the partner of investigator Anthony Romano." Richard's face paled slightly. "Helen is alive? And she kept all the evidence Romano collected. She waited for the right moment, just like Evelyn. The circle is closing, Richard. At the auction, everything will come to light, unless you choose the right path for the first time in your life." Richard walked over to an armchair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older. "You don't understand the implications. It's not just a few people who will fall, it's an entire system. Banks, politicians, judges." "Then let it fall," Alexander declared with conviction, "and let us rebuild something better from the ruins." Richard's phone rang. After reading the message, he stood up with an ironic smile. "Impressive, truly impressive. But you forgot one crucial thing, Alexander. I also have my cards to play." He walked to the door, pausing before leaving. "I suggest you check the latest news about your precious foundation. And remember, we still have 48 hours until the auction. Plenty of time for you to reconsider your position." As soon as Richard left, Alexander checked his phone. The news was devastating. All the foundation's major partners had cancelled their projects. Accounts had been frozen for investigation. Years of social work were crumbling in a matter of hours. His phone rang. It was Laura. "Alexander, we found Helen. She has everything: recordings, documents, evidence linking Richard and Albert to an international corruption network. But," she hesitated, "but Richard has something big planned for the auction. Helen found out they're going to attempt one last strike, something that could affect the entire financial market. We need to stop them, but if we do it the wrong way, thousands of innocent people will be hurt." Alexander looked out the window at the sunflower garden, thinking about everything Eleanor and Evelyn had sacrificed to protect him and prepare him for this moment. The choice before him was impossible: expose the truth and risk a financial collapse that would affect thousands, or find a way to bring justice without destroying innocent lives. "Meet me at the hotel in an hour," he decided. "We need to plan every detail of the next 2 days. I won't let Richard win, but I also won't become what I've always fought against." As he left Sunflower House, Alexander knew the real battle was just beginning. The charity auction would be more than a social event. It would be the stage for the final reckoning between two completely opposing worldviews, and this time, there would be no middle ground. The Museum of Modern Art in New York glowed on the night of the charity auction, its lights illuminating the modern facade as luxury cars arrived, carrying the elite of New York society. Alexander adjusted his tie while observing the activity from the window of a private room on the second floor. "All the players are in position," Laura informed, entering the room with Helen Vieira, an elegant 60-year-old woman carrying a folder under her arm. "Evelyn is safe at the agreed location with all the documentation." "Richard just arrived," Helen added, checking her tablet. "And as we predicted, he brought representatives from the major banks and investment funds. They plan to announce the merger that will give him control over 30% of the national financial market." Alexander nodded gravely. "And with that power, the money laundering scheme would become virtually impossible to dismantle." He turned to the two women. "Does everyone know what to do?" Laura flashed her press badge. "The live broadcast will begin as soon as you take the stage for your speech. The major media outlets are present. This time they won't be able to ignore the story." Mr. Montgomery, Olivia, the director of the foundation, peeked into the room. "It's time." The main hall of the museum was packed. Valuable works of art adorned the walls, awaiting bids for the auction that would benefit charities, ironically many of which were now suffering from the Montgomery Foundation's funding freeze. Richard was in his element, surrounded by admirers and business partners. His confident smile faltered for just a moment when he saw Alexander approaching the stage. "Good evening, everyone," Alexander began, his voice clear and steady through the microphones. "Tonight is about legacies, about what we choose to leave for the next generations." He paused, his eyes meeting Richard's in the crowd. 40 years. Ergo, my biological father, Charles Almeida Lima, made a choice. He chose truth over power, integrity over profit. That choice cost our family dearly, but it planted deep roots. The doors of the hall opened, and Evelyn entered, elegant in a midnight blue dress accompanied by Margaret. A murmur of recognition swept through the audience. My biological mother, Evelyn Almeida Lima, also made a choice. She chose to protect me, relying on the help of an extraordinary woman, Eleanor Montgomery, who raised me with values I carry. To this day, Richard began to move toward a side exit, but found his path blocked by discreetly positioned security. Laura, on the other side of the hall, was already broadcasting everything live to thousands of viewers. Tonight, Richard Almeida Lima planned to announce a historic merger in the financial market, Alexander continued. A merger that would solidify a decades-long scheme of corruption and money laundering. The audience held its breath. Richard finally stepped forward, shouting, "He's insane." "There's no evidence." "I have all the evidence," Alexander replied calmly, making a signal. Helen Vieira stood up, along with several other guests who revealed themselves to be agents from the federal police and the district attorney's office. "But more important than the evidence, I have a choice to make, just like all of you." Turned to the audience, now in complete silence. "We could expose everything at once, causing an earthquake in the financial market that would affect thousands of innocent people. But that would make us no better than those who wield power without caring about the consequences." Evelyn approached the stage, discreet tears in her eyes. Alexander extended his hand to her, helping her up. "Instead, we've chosen a different path. All the documents and evidence are already with the proper authorities. A joint task force from the district attorney's office and the Federal Reserve has been conducting a parallel investigation over the past 2 months, laying the groundwork for a controlled transition in the management of the involved institutions." Richard, realizing he was cornered, pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I have evidence against all of you too. Years of suspicious dealings by the Montgomery Foundation. Dealings you yourself orchestrated? Laura interjected, stepping forward with her recorder. I have your confession recorded at Sunflower House, remember? The agents moved closer to Richard, who finally let his shoulders slump in defeat. As he was escorted out of the hall, Alexander concluded his speech. The true legacy isn't in the wealth we accumulate or the power we wield. It's in the lives we touch, the choices we make every day between what's right and what's easy. My mother Evelyn chose to protect me. Eleanor chose to teach me. And today, I choose to honor them both by using the resources of the Montgomery Foundation to create a program to protect and support families affected by corruption schemes. Evelyn embraced her son as applause began to echo through the hall. And as we predicted, he brought representatives from the major banks and investment funds. They plan to announce the merger that will give him control over 30% of the national financial market. Alexander nodded gravely. And with that power, the money laundering scheme would become virtually impossible to dismantle. He turned to the two women. Does everyone know what to do? Laura flashed her press badge. The live broadcast will begin as soon as you take the stage. For your speech. The major media outlets are present. This time they won't be able to ignore the story. Mr. Montgomery? Olivia, the director of the foundation, peeked into the room. It's time. The main hall of the museum was packed. Valuable works of art adorned the walls, awaiting bids for the auction that would benefit charities. Ironically, many of which were now suffering from the Montgomery Foundation's funding freeze. Richard was in his element, surrounded by admirers and business partners. His confident smile faltered for just a moment when he saw Alexander approaching the stage. Good evening, everyone, Alexander began, his voice clear and steady through the microphones. Tonight is about legacies, about what we choose to leave for the next generations. He paused, his eyes meeting Richard's in the crowd. 40 years. Hago, my biological father, Charles Almeida Lima, made a choice. He chose truth over power, integrity over profit. That choice cost our family dearly, but it planted deep roots. The doors of the hall opened, and Evelyn entered, elegant in a midnight blue, dress accompanied by Margaret. A murmur of recognition swept through the audience. My biological mother, Evelyn Almeida Lima, also made a choice. She chose to protect me, relying on the help of an extraordinary woman, Eleanor Montgomery, who raised me with values I carry to this day. Richard began to move toward a side exit, but found his path blocked by discreetly positioned security. Laura, on the other side of the hall, was already broadcasting everything live to thousands of viewers. Tonight, Richard Almeida Lima planned to announce a historic merger in the financial market, Alexander continued. A merger that would solidify a decades-long scheme of corruption and money laundering. The audience held its breath. Richard finally stepped forward, shouting, "He's insane. There's no evidence." "I have all the evidence," Alexander replied calmly, making a signal. Helen Vieira stood up, along with several other guests who revealed themselves to be agents from the federal police and the district attorney's office. "But more important than the evidence, I have a choice to make, just like all of you." He turned to the audience, now in complete silence. "We could expose everything at once, causing an earthquake in the financial market that would affect thousands of innocent people. But that would make us no better than those who wield power without caring about the consequences." Evelyn approached the stage, discreet tears in her eyes. Alexander extended his hand to her, helping her up. "Instead, we've chosen a different path. All the documents and evidence are already with the proper authorities. A joint task force from the district attorney's office and the Federal Reserve has been conducting a parallel investigation over the past 2 months, laying the groundwork for a controlled transition in the management of the involved institutions." Richard, realizing Laura smiled, putting away her recording equipment. Her story was already guaranteed front-page coverage for the next day. Hours later, at the Montgomery mansion, Alexander found his birth mother gazing at Eleanor's portrait in the study. "She would be proud," Evelyn said softly, "of how you found a way to bring justice without perpetuating the cycle of destruction." "I learned from the best," Alexander smiled, embracing her. "And now, Do you plan to return to Sunflower House? Actually, Evelyn hesitated. Margaret suggested I could stay in the guest room for a while. If Huey was cornered, pulled an envelope from his jacket. I have evidence against all of you too. Years of suspicious dealings by the Montgomery Foundation. Dealings you yourself orchestrated? Laura interjected, stepping forward with her recorder. I have your confession recorded at Sunflower House, remember? The agents moved closer to Richard, who finally let his shoulders slump in defeat. As he was escorted out of the hall, Alexander concluded his speech. The true legacy isn't in the wealth we accumulate or the power we wield. It's in the lives we touch, the choices we make every day between what's right and what's easy. My mother Evelyn chose to protect me. Eleanor chose to teach me. And today I choose to honor them both by using the resources of the Montgomery Foundation to create a program to protect and support families affected by corruption schemes. Evelyn embraced her son as applause began to echo through the hall.